I think there's probably a fallacy in some that, oh my God, this is going to make us have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new pilots into the system. I'm actually looking at a spreadsheet over here on my other screen. If we look at from 2005, when we started doing sport pilot search, through 2025, we only did 8,958 total. We're doing 100, a couple hundred a year. There's a little boost in the beginning, but then it really kind of tapered off. The challenge is, this is probably not the entry point for most people who want to have a career path in aviation training. That's still likely going to be a private pilot certificate.
How's it going, everybody? This is Tim Jedrick with Red Rudder Marketing. You are listening to the Aviation Business Podcast. So today we have a special guest. Before we roll into that, got some quick housekeeping things here too. So if you are a flight school and are interested in growing your school and enrolling more students, check out rightruddermarketing.com. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast, check out rightruddermarketing.com or Aviation Business Podcast. We're also on the internet and a separate website as too. We're on the YouTube, so YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, all those social networks. If you haven't followed us, please subscribe, follow us, like, I'll do all the type of stuff. Without further ado, so we have a really good one. So last week, by the way, we were talking about MOSAIC, because MOSAIC has been a pretty hot topic in the past maybe year or so. We had a panel talking, and a lot of them were flight school owners. Some people were in other associations, and they had difference of opinions and different perspectives about this topic. And I wanted to kind of put that aside, and we have someone special here. I won't give away too much of what he does. I like to have our guests usually introduce themselves. His name is Jason Blair. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but I'll let him kind of give a quick introduction about who he is, what he did, where he came from, what he's going to do.
Well, hey, all. So I'm a DPE and, been a flight instructor since 2001. We're heading towards 20 years as an examiner, which went by super fast. And actually, I was kind of one of the early guys that really started adopting sport pilot stuff. I was probably one of the early sport pilot examiners. When we started doing this, I used to work with the National Association of Flight Instructors up at EAA. Obviously, EAA and AOPA and NAFI were all big proponents of another method for people to get in with sport pilot. And that kind of brought in that light sport revolution that we saw in the early 2000s. And, I think a lot of us looked at that and thought maybe there was going to be a big push, and it just never quite got to where we wanted. One of the big drawbacks that we had with that was that weight, right? The 1,000 kilograms of 1,320 pounds. And what's super cool now is, starting with last year on the pilot side, we're decoupling what a sport pilot can fly with MOSAIC. And, it's not just LSA airplanes. We've got a different sport category of aircraft, and we're decoupling the certification of the LSA airplanes and opening that up to a higher weight that just kind of kicked off here last week at Oshkosh, right? And I think a lot of us are coming back from Oshkosh, revealing new things from manufacturers that we all looked at and went, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, everybody knew this was coming a year ago, and the manufacturers have been working hard to innovate and create some new airplanes that we're going to see in the flight training market. And I think it's awesome to see that we're going to have some new opportunities for the flight training businesses out there to leverage not just sport pilot training, because there's certainly some limitations there. There's some benefits there with legacy airplanes now that weren't, but also potentially new aircraft from the manufacturers coming out in the next couple of years that may actually revolutionize how we do flight training in terms of efficiency, in terms of cost, in terms of available aircraft on the market, because the process for them to get an airplane to market is going to be a lot faster through the ASTM than it was through the previous Part 23, Part 25 certification process. So I'm pretty excited to see that as an examiner. I won't lie, as a big guy as an examiner, I like doing sport pilot airplanes that I can do, or sport pilot check rides and airplanes that I don't have to stop and do a pit stop for gas along the way anymore. Had a couple of those check rides and RV-12s and Technums and things like that, where the big guy here was like, all right, get your instructor out here. Let's do a pit stop, throw some more juice in to keep us under the weight and balance halfway through the check ride, and we can get it done. But now we can do these in legacy airplanes, and we're seeing a little bit more accessibility for folks in the flight training operators to actually provide sport pilot training without having to go find an LSA airplane.
Yeah. So one of the things that, the way I actually met Jason, it was probably a few years ago, was actually at Flight School Association International, I guess is what they're called now. So
Yeah.
FSANA, FSI. That was probably like 3, 4 years ago when I first met him. And then I think it's this year actually. Either this year or last year, he had done a seminar exactly on Sport Pilot. And I was just, intrigued because there's so many different like regs as far as what they can do, what they cannot do. And I even emailed him after the event. I'm like, hey, can you please share your presentation? Because my team had been publishing some stuff. And I'm like, is this right? And like, I don't, you know, uh, we like to market stuff and say, hey, pilot salaries or, career stuff. But when it gets to technical things, I'm always really weary of my team because some of them are not pilots. And, as me as a pilot, I know that we are very critical of each other if we have a reg wrong or anything like that. So I want to make sure we get it right. So it's really quite the honor to have Jason on this podcast to really just, speak on it, especially with his experience. Recently, I was, doing my commercial and I had this book. It's like an orange ASA book. And I look at the author actually, and it says name. I'm like, oh, I know this guy. So it's quite a loop around, from, pilot training and then seeing him at the trade shows, conferences, and now to have him on our guest. So I'm super excited to have him on here. Kind of to dive into this MOSAIC topic, when you were doing your seminars, you said you also mentioned NAFI, National Association of Flight Instructors, great group of people as well.
Yeah.
But they also, by the way, they do have their summit coming up in, I believe, September in Dallas. So if you are, flight instructor, CFI, maybe even a student pilot and looking to be a better, safer pilot, highly recommend checking out, going to Dallas in September 2026 and hanging out with the crew. Anyway, quick shout out. I think I had to do that real quick.
Well, and let me add here. I really recommend any CFIs who's active in this. If you're a business operator, engage with these conferences, NAFI, FSI, whatever happens to be. Get to these events. Redbird does there because there's so much information that gets shared between us. Just like you and I did. I do a seminar, and you're like, "Hey, I got some stuff I get out of that, right?" And every time I go to one of these, I talk to folks and I learn something new too. And I'll be honest, when we started doing that MOSAIC stuff, I had a lot of questions, so I started digging in deep to it. And I even made some good friends in a few FAA spots and asked some questions that we all went, man, I didn't think about that, right? And so now, we've got some new things that have come out. There was an info document that came out recently. And every time we ask these questions, it makes us understand these regulations a little bit better and make sure the training we're providing is good quality, valid training as well.
Well, let's touch on that for just a little bit because, you do these seminars. I want to know what's kind of the number one question or feedback you're getting after you kind of present about this MOSAIC changes, about what the things are happening. Because like you're out there in the field, people are telling you and kind of giving you some feedback right off the bat. What are some of the things that they're mentioning and some of the concerns maybe or challenges that they might be facing as these new regulations come to fruition?
That's a great question. I think I want to split that into kind of two things. One is what can a pilot who's acting as a sport pilot do? And then what is this new sport pilot only CFI thing and what can they do? What are the limitations? So if we look at the pilot side, it's pretty clear actually how the regulation ended up written. You can fly an airplane with a clean stall speed of 59 knots or less. One of the things I really tell people is be careful when you look at the airplane. There are even makes and models of airplanes where, depending on the year, like I was looking at a Cardinal one time, a Cessna 177, and the early models had a slower stall speed than the later models. So depending on the year of the airplane, you may or may not be able to fly even the same airplane. But the really simple answer is look at the bottom of the green arc in the airplane. If that's about 60 knots, if it's in miles per hour, you got to do the correction, right? But if it's 60 knots or less, you're probably going to be able to fly that as a sport pilot, whether you're certificated as one or if you're a higher level certificate holder and acting as sport pilot privileges. And that gets confusing for folks sometimes. You could be a private instrument or commercial pilot, ATP, and just say, look, I didn't have a medical. I let it lapse. I don't feel like doing it. I'm not doing this stuff. I just want to fly for fun. And you can fly with a driver's license only as long as you haven't had a medical revoked or, denied. You can act as a sport pilot with up to one passenger in an airplane that doesn't stall higher than 59 knots. And that includes a lot of legacy airplanes now. We got 172s and Cherokees and Archers and Warriors and, Diamonds, even a couple of them. There's a whole bunch of airplanes that previously were over that 1,320 pound gross weight limit for LSA airplanes. We've decoupled that, and now you can fly anything that fits in that category, which is pretty darn cool. Even added things like a sport pilot can fly at night now if they get the proper training and endorsement. A sport pilot can fly a constant speed propeller airplane. I said that carefully because that's not the same thing as a complex airplane. Although, under the cool new regulations, a sport pilot, somebody who's acting as a sport pilot, could fly a retractable gear airplane. They need an endorsement for the constant speed. They need an endorsement for the complex. If you were a higher certificate level holder and had a complex endorsement, it meets both of those requirements and kind of grandfathers in. But somebody who's just a sport pilot certificate holder can now fly airplanes like that. And we're going to see a bunch of new airplanes come out under this MOSAIC that are going to take advantage of those things, have constant speed props, have gear that goes up and down, things that we didn't previously see in LSA airplanes. So that's the biggest thing. And, I think there's probably a fallacy in some that, oh my God, this is going to make us have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new pilots into the system. I'm actually looking at a spreadsheet over here on my other screen. If we look at from 2005, when we started doing sport pilot search, through 2025, we only did 8,958 total. I mean, we're doing a couple hundred a year. There's a little boost in the beginning, but then it really kind of tapered off. The challenge is, this is probably not the entry point for most people who want to have a career path in aviation training. That's still likely going to be a private pilot certificate. We don't at this time have a direct bump up from a sport pilot to a private pilot that is an add-on certificate. An analogy that we think about this, like if somebody has a commercial single engine certificate, they want to add on the multi-engine commercial, you go to the back of the ACS and there's a task table that just gives you a few things. You don't need a knowledge test. You just do another check ride, train to proficiency, and do the things. There is not that analogous type of thing to go from sport pilot to private. You're actually changing certificate levels. So that means you're going to have to do the experience requirements again. You're going to have to take a knowledge test. You're going to have to take a practical test. So if you have somebody coming in who wants to learn to fly and they're saying, look, this is a career thing for me, I know I'm going to end up a commercial pilot, ATP eventually, there's not really an advantage to bring them in as a sport pilot first and then bump them through. They're just going to take an extra check rides and fly an extra time. Now, for folks that just want to fly for fun, pleasure, and business flying, it is an awesome opportunity. And a lot of flight schools out there have people that just want to fly and have some fun, take their family flying. I live in Michigan. One of the most common things people love to do here is just go flying along the lakeshore because darn it, it's pretty. I still say that nobody would go to the Caribbean if we didn't have winter here. But that winter stuff does drive people south. So, I mean, it's a beautiful, fun thing to do, and flight schools can take advantage of providing training in airplanes they already own, the legacy airplanes that they weren't previously able to provide sport pilot training in. You'll also probably see some people where, one of renters and things like that, private owners flying their airplane. Imagine the guy that's been flying for 20 or 30 years. All he does is fly by himself with his friends, his wife, whatever it happens to be. And he says, look, I'm just not going to bother going through that special issuance medical anymore. I'm just going to fly as a sport pilot. He's perfectly flying to fly, but he can skip that hurdle and he flies on his driver's license, how to blast flying. So that's kind of the big picture of who gets to fly as a sport pilot, some of the things they get to do. Now we also have, and we've seen some stuff on this that's a little bit confusing, the new sport pilot only CFI-S. They knew it's been there, but it's kind of getting some new traction. People see this. I can get to be a sport pilot only CFI, airplane single engine land, with less flight hours. I might only have a sport pilot certificate or a private pilot, and I can start providing training to people to build my hours and make some money while I'm doing this flying, right? Pretty cool thing. And this is one of those things that I think it's really important for flight training operators and CFIs who are doing this to pay a lot of attention to the limitations of what a sport-only CFI can do. I'm pretty conservative on this because I want to always stay on the recommending side of making sure you're in compliance with the FAA regulations. The way it looks right now is a sport pilot-only CFI is only able to provide training that is towards sport pilot training or certificates or sport pilot level proficiency or currency. There's a little gray area in student pilot training there. So you could take a sport pilot only CFI and provide training to somebody who's working towards solo, working towards, some cross country experience. And if that person hasn't wink, wink told me yet, I don't know that I want to be a sport pilot or a private pilot, that training is towards student pilot training. We're following me here.
No,
But then
you lost me there.
okay,
I've
so
always thought
so
that
I
the
am a
training is
student, and
for
they
a
came in
certificate.
and they said, "Look, I want to be a pilot. I don't know what I want to do yet. Maybe I'll be a sport, maybe I'll be a private." The sport only CFI could provide them training towards their solo, right? We're doing student pilot training. they can't necessarily do training specifically toward the private pilot certificate, but the experience that they're getting does count. We've got some legal interpretations on that
Oh,
from a
okay.
sport pilot. So, if they're doing the training to get them on their long cross country, or we're getting them up to do some practice landings, they can do that kind of stuff. They can certainly provide training toward a sport pilot certificate. And then if somebody comes back in and says, "Hey, I think I want a flight review, I want a tailwheel endorsement, I want things like that, and I'm only flying as a sport pilot," that sport pilot only CFI can provide that training. I was kind of specific there because I'm going to wrap back around. If
Okay.
I said I want to get tailwheel endorsed and I want to fly as a sport pilot, that's cool. If I take that sport pilot only CFI and say I want to get tailwheel endorsement, and then I'm going to go fly my Cessna 180 with 3 people as a private pilot, technically the sport only CFI is not able to provide that training, and that training would only be eligible to be used in sport pilot privileges by the person that received that. So this is where it's going to get messy, right? So some of the things we've seen is the dude that posts on Facebook that says, "I'm here to do your VFR cross country training toward your commercial certificate. Let me ride with you for that 2-hour day and 2-hour night dual cross country that has to be provided in VFR." Well, sport pilot isn't saying VFR. Those are separate things. Yes, it's probably going to be in VFR, but the sport pilot only CFI cannot provide that training under 61129 that is specific to the commercial certificate. So as mean old examiner looks at your logbook and says, "Hey, I see you're getting ready for your check ride here, and that night cross country that you did was with a CFI-S. I can't use that to qualify toward your commercial certificate." If you had a flight review that from somebody that was a CFI-S, a sport pilot only CFI, you can only exercise sport pilot privileges. You wouldn't be able to go out and fly with family, friends with more than 2 people in the airplane. The second passenger, you and 2 passengers, or airplanes above that 59 knot stall speed. So that's something to be careful. Those sport pilot CFIs are limited in what they can do, but there are some opportunities there for somebody to get into some training a little bit early. One of the best things I tell people that you can use sport pilot only CFIs for, and ground instructor certificate holders, if somebody wants to work on this while they're getting their commercial, even before they get their CFI, it's a great opportunity to have them help teaching some ground training at your school. It's also a great way to get them some teaching experience if they're going to become a CFI later. So some quirks in there you got to look at. What can the sport pilot only CFI do? If you are working with a sport pilot CFI as a pilot, some of the things that limits you to, and then what can somebody who is a pilot, who wants to just fly as a sport pilot do? And there's a lot of things out there now that they can do. It's pretty cool. We open that up, and the biggest thing is you get to fly a lot of airplanes you didn't get to used to fly as a sport pilot.
So I guess what I've heard is from other flight schools around here is like, why is it even worth playing with this whole thing? Because for the most part, I have to reread the regs, but the training that's required for the sport pilot, going up there, flight level, straight level, turn, I don't know what maneuvers you got to do for sport pilot per se, but a lot of it's very similar to private pilot. And by the time that, they get their certificates, and they finally start flying around, they're very limited. So you mentioned some things like, flying at night, you can't technically fly at night as a sport pilot. There's some caveats there that we didn't really go over here. And then as they approached all these limitations, it's like, well, I should have got my private pilot then. And that's kind of what a lot of flight school owners and operators are telling us, we don't want to touch it because by the time they're done with the sport pilot training, they're going to want to get into instrument training in private, but they still got to do their thing. And it's it's just a waste, not say waste of money, but it's or maybe it's catered for the wrong audience. So maybe that's what it is. I don't know if you think the same.
I do. There's a couple of things there. It depends on where you're at. I mean, so if you are a career focused flight training providing, services, sport pilot's probably not something you're going to do a whole lot of. One of the operators that's in my area here, they do a lot of just local people that like going flying. They're in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and they just want to be a pilot and fly a little bit. And they have no intention of getting an instrument rating. So this gives an opportunity for that. This isn't a huge market, but there are certainly some folks that, if I said, "Look, I know I have, high blood pressure and I could get a medical, but I'd have to go through special issuance. It's not something that would stop you from getting a medical, but I have a driver's license and I'm good." They might choose to go sport pilot and avoid that if they're just going to be personally flying for pleasure, that kind of stuff. It is a smaller market for sure. it's more of a hobby and pleasure market for actual sport pilot certificates than it is anything else. And it's not going to be for every flight training provider. It's going to be for the ones that do cater to some of the personal flying more than they do the career focused training pathways for people.
Well, okay, so that's another thing that you mentioned there too. So let's say an older gentleman, he has high blood pressure or maybe diabetes or something. I have no idea. Typically, they would need a special issuance, and then they would need to go through the whole process with FAA for the medical. But then now we're saying, okay, well, you can just we can just fly with their driver's license now. Is that kind of circumventing the FAA medical process and we're letting people that shouldn't be flying? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a bad take, but like I've heard this from other
No,
people too. It's
it's
like
not a
they don't.
bad take, and that I think that's a very valid point. I mean, the intent and the technical answer is if you have a condition that would preclude you from ever being issued an FAA medical, you can't fly with that condition, right? However, there are a lot of conditions that folks have that are issuable under special issuance. I mean, this isn't the answer of like, yo, I had my 7th heart attack yesterday, but I heard sport pilots out. I'm good now. I still got a driver's license. This is not it, right? But like, if it's something that's manageable and you would normally be able to get a medical and you just don't want to go through the process, that certainly is something that we can allow people to now do with a driver's license. There's a quirk on this that we ran into as well. It's kind of funny. We look at somebody who wants to solo, right? They got to be 16 years old to solo, right? An airplane.
Right.
Not every 16-year-old has a driver's license yet. So we actually ran into a guy that, to solo, he was going to be a sport pilot to start, but he actually had to get a medical because he didn't have a driver's license for it. All he had is a state ID, and a state ID doesn't count as a driver's license. So he got a medical so he could solo as a sport pilot, right? These little confusing hiccups that you kind of run into, and you're like, I didn't think of it that way, right? So, we got to watch these little details. And, it's always worth too, if you're a flight training provider, make sure your insurance is okay with it, right? Are they asking you to have any other sort of documentation? What we've seen so far is most of the underwriters are pretty cool with it. Like, look, if the FAA says you can go do it, you can go do it. But that is one of those checks that a lot of operators have is we keep a copy, or a record of somebody's CFI currency. We keep a copy of their medical. Like when we dispatch an airplane, a lot of the digital software systems we do, not only are we checking to make sure the airplane is good, but a lot of the systems will check, does somebody have a current medical? Do they have a current flight review? And that way, when we dispatch an airplane, we're making sure as an operator, we're not giving somebody who's not, current in any way, a plane to go fly on that would cause us potential breach of our insurance policies too. So, those are some of the document checking. It's a different process now. We don't have to check if there's a medical, if George says he's flying as a sport pilot, right? So some things you might want to think about in the process of your flight training operation too.
So also one of the things you mentioned too, so we kind of talked about the medical stuff a little bit. Let's talk about kind of endorsements, because that kind of goes with the night flying thing and also the complex / variable pressure propeller, complex, or constant speed prop. I'm sorry, constant speed prop, tailwheel. I think there's another one, night flying. They're probably those are the 3 main ones, right? So
they are. So those are the big ones. I mean, night flying is probably the easiest one to address. So you can fly as a sport pilot now if you have an endorsement. So let's take it as a sport pilot certificated pilot, somebody who doesn't have a higher level certificate. They need to basically get 3 hours of night training. It's very similar requirement, a little shorter cross country than in the private certificate. They need to get that training either from a standard CFI or a sport only CFI who has that endorsement, and get endorsement. They can fly at night, but there's a catch. They have to have a medical. So a sport only pilot who flies at night needs a medical. Okay. So they could get a medical 3rd class or higher. They could then, if they want to use basic med after they've had one medical and do that stuff. If they want to fly in the daytime, they don't need the medical, but if they want to fly at night, they do. If they're a private commercial ATP certificate holder or higher, they still need a medical to exercise those privileges. The training they received in that counts. And honest answer, they're basically flying as a private pilot at that point. So you have a medical, you have the privileges. What it did is it opened up the pathway for sport-only certificated pilots to fly at night. The same holds true of retractable gear airplanes. So we can give an endorsement, that AC 6165, put endorsements in there. We can let somebody who's a sport pilot only or sport pilot acting fly a retractable gear airplane. Now, that is different than a complex endorsement because a complex airplane may be different than something that is retractable gear. We could have an airplane where the gear goes up and down that doesn't have constant speed prop. Most are probably going to have flaps, but maybe they don't. We can get all kinds of creative ways to get to the complex answer. And they separated those endorsements, so you have to have a retractable gear endorsement. Now, there's also a constant speed propeller endorsement now, which is a little confusing because if you're a private pilot and you fly an airplane that's not complex, you don't need a constant speed endorsement. But if you're a sport pilot and you fly an airplane that is not complex, gear doesn't go up and down, but does have a constant speed prop, now you need an endorsement for it. Seems confusing. And we got even more confusing on this. We dug into it because we asked, the language actually said a manual controllable pitch propeller. And we went, you mean constant speed? And they said, no, manual controllable pitch. And I went, wait, what's the difference, right? And so what we got to is a manual controllable pitch propeller, as guidance given to us as designees and stuff, said it's got a knob in the plane that lets you change the propeller angle. Okay, so some airplanes are constant speed. The Cirrus, the Diamonds, we have FADEC, right? That a sport pilot could fly an airplane that had a FADEC because it doesn't have a knob in the airplane. But if it had a knob and the prop angle changes, now we need an endorsement. I know that seems a little fuzzy, but the short answer is you just need endorsement if you can physically control the angle of that propeller from inside the airplane. So you might find yourself with two endorsements, one for retractable gear, one for the constant speed prop if you're flying as a sport pilot in an airplane that has those systems.
Clear as mud.
So, I melted your brain a little bit there.
And the first time I heard it, it didn't make sense. But as I've kind of, broached the subject more and more often, and I've done more, looked at the regs and I've talked about it with other flight schools and now it kind of makes more sense. Just, it gets to make more sense the more you look at it. But the first time I came to this, this was a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm like, this is insane. I don't get it. Because I kind of,
and it's just new stuff, right? Like we're just approaching some of this different than we have.
Yeah, it's kind of to your point. There was that post on Facebook, I'll say a year ago. It was like some lady or guy is like, oh, I'm a CFI-S. I can give you your tailwheel. I can do your complex. I can do your retract. I can do everything. Just come to me. And it's like, and that's the one you showed in your presentation. It's like, well,
right.
Can you or no, can you not? It's like, so. And then one thing that I really like that you said earlier is that not every single plane, kind of going to the, the manufacturer side of things too, is like not every single plane is technically, you can operate as a sport pilot. So you brought up the Cessna 177 Cardinal. Some of those speeds are over 59 knots for the stall speed. So it depends on a serial number now. So it's not even even the model. It's like, okay, I have, let's say, I don't know, a Tecnam, or I have a, Piper Cherokee.
Yeah.
It depends on the serial number of that specific aircraft. If I can fly as a sport pilot, which is, to me, is insane. I was like, okay, well.
And even more fun, the FAA made sure they were clear on this, as originally certificated. So I can't take my 182 out and mod it out with big Horton STOL kits and VGs and be like, my stall speed's down at 39 now. Well, if it was at 62 before, just because you modified it, that doesn't work. So, you do have to dig into what the aircraft was certified at, look at the POH, see if it's listed. You can look at the type certificate data sheet if you've got questions. The good news is you don't have to do this lots of times. Figure out the airplanes you can fly. If you know the airplane you're flying, make sure. Many of the airplanes we fly, in a lot of light GA airplane flying do qualify for this now. Even my old Stinson, which I love.
So there's some I guess there's some limitations for the aircraft too. So you said one passenger, but you could have 4 seats, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
4 seats for the.
Yep.
Is there altitude restrictions, like how high you can go, or I don't know, for sport pilot?
Oh, I honestly have to dig back into that. I feel like there was, but I can't remember. And some of these are like, you get them kind of mixed up until you look at it each time, because originally there was a speed limit that was proposed, right? You couldn't go faster than 250 knots, but in the final regulation that was out there. So this is one of those things that if anybody's looking at the details on this, don't just Google and look at whatever somebody published. Maybe this is what it's going to be, what's in the proposed. Some great resources. AOPA's got a great page on this, sport pilot limitations. So does EAA. Go to those and make sure, because they actually left us a lot more open than we originally thought it was going to be when the first proposal for these rules came out. So, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Most importantly, they opened that up for the airplanes too, right? We're going to see cool new airplanes that are going to come out in this. I don't know if you want to dive there next. You want to dig into it?
Yeah, let's dig into it, because I think we were just at Oshkosh, and a couple weeks ago. And there's so many cool things that I was like seeing there. So yeah, you have your EVTOL, electric takeoff, whatever, vertical takeoff. Some of the things I've saw even was like avionics upgrades and different types of experimental aircraft that are coming out, different makes and models. That I'm not going to call it any names, unless you guys want to sponsor the show. but yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff we saw there, and I'm just wondering, for me, I've always had this impression that to get a certificated type aircraft out to the market, it's usually a very arduous and long process. So, like that, there's a kind of this impression that aviation's behind the eight ball. So, you look at other industries that are implementing all this new technology, AI, engineering, and in aviation, we're flying to say, an IO320 or IO360. These are engines from 1950, 1960s. We're still flying them in the 2020s, because mainly because it's hard to certificate, new engines and all the type of stuff. Same thing with the aircraft models. I mean, the Cessna 172 is, prolific with flight training and GA, just because there hasn't been another aircraft that's been able to really swoop in there and replace these models. Piper Cherokee and all that stuff is also kind of bundled in this. But these are the two main aircraft that are really used for flight training because they're certificated, they meet the specs, they're very forgivable. And then, when they had the LSA opportunity, there's too much limitations as far as the weight, speed, all that type of thing. So with this now coming out, I haven't seen any changes immediately with aircraft today. Today's, we're in August, September of 2026. What can we expect as the general population, pilot population, aviation population? What can we expect to kind of see rolled out in the next couple of years, and how does MOSAIC really change this entire landscape for aircraft manufacturers and new planes hitting the market?
Dude, I think we got so much cool stuff coming. I mean, so, we had basically a year since last year when the sport pilot change happened, and we knew the MOSAIC, change for the ASTM allowance for aircraft certification was coming. We're all flying legacy airplanes. My God, half the training providers are out there flying 40, 50-year-old airplanes. I just did in my brain the swag, my 1947 Stinson. I have a goal to be flying that airplane when I turn 70. And the crazy part is that airplane will be 100 years old at that point. And it's not illogical to think that airplane's going to fly another 20 years. But my God, when we think about we're flying airplanes that are going to be 100 years old, like nobody when they built those airplanes thought they were going to last that long, right? And we built a lot of airplanes in the 60s and 70s, and then the 80s it crashed, and we're still leveraging those in the production models of our legacy training providers, whether it's a Cessna or a Scott, a Piper, and now we've got some Cirrus and Diamond as our primary manufacturers out there that have been there over the last 20 years. They're not producing the numbers of airplanes that we used to, and you're absolutely right. The problem in many parts was it's hard to get an airplane certificated and get the economies of scale. We are completely changing that certification process for airplanes and making it expedited and easier. Even as recent as last week, when we were at Oshkosh, in my presentation, I said, multi-engine MOSAIC, LSA airplanes, if they ever exist, right? Because they made it, holy crap, in the middle of the week, we see a manufacturer pop out, oh yeah, we got a multi-engine MOSAIC compliant airplane we're launching right now. And you're like, oh wow, that was quick, right? Like, we have people launching in the last few days. We've seen 4 or 5 different airplanes. This will be MOSAIC compliant. That'll be MOSAIC compliant. These manufacturers are going to be new to the market, and honestly, if they ramp this up, because we don't have the limitation of weight that we used to, they can make a more robust airplane with modern design technology that's going to be highly useful for the flight training market. We're seeing some promoted airplanes that are already getting pushed to the system. Orders are going to be starting to take, and we're seeing some draft airplanes that we're going to change the model a little bit. Hey, we're just going to put 3 seats in it. Why do we need 4, right? I want a front seat pilot, I want an instructor, and I want an observer in the back, right? I mean, we're looking at airplanes that may be clean sheet built for the flight training market, and it's going to be a disruptor. I think we're going to have brand new airplanes out there that flight schools are going to be operating. We're looking at price points that are a lot lower than some of the legacy airplanes have been. Some are looking at $200,000, $250,000 for an airplane. If you look at a $600,000 or $700,000 legacy airplane, and a flight school says, man, I can buy 2 or 3 for the price of 1, have the same effective training. We've seen a couple of these, even in the last couple of days, approved for IFR flight now. Holy crap, LSA airplane, IFR, we couldn't do that before, right? So now we got an IFR training airplane. Schools are going to be able to buy airplanes and make them more efficient. The ends are, the engine technology is coming up. We're trying to head towards electric. personal opinion, I don't think we're there yet. I think we're skipping the gap of maybe some hybrid. There's a lot of them looking at legacy stuff. The battery charging time and swapping time isn't quite there yet, but it's going to get there, right? I mean, we're making this, and this is the legacy airplanes. Maybe going to have to bow out a little bit or get hungry and figure out what they're going to do to work in this market, to compete with brand new clean sheet airplanes that no longer have the restriction of the weight that they had to work with. And we can build fully functional, good training airplanes that way. I think we got some cool stuff happening. I mean, even one of them that I talked to is like, we're targeting our parts availability to be Amazon deliverable, right? Instead of calling a country three continents away and saying I need an alternator or a special tire, or whatever it happens to be, if I can hop on Amazon and be like, I need a tire by Tuesday, and they'll be like, well, it'll be there at 4:30 tomorrow morning instead, right? I mean, that's what Amazon did at my house this morning. Got the doorbell knock. I'm like, what are you guys doing here this early? Well, they deliver, right? I mean, if we can put parts supply and structure into common distribution markets, it's going to make these airplanes a lot more useful for the flight schools, and the uptime is going to go, and we're going to have lower, fuel burns and more efficient airplanes. It's going to change how we do flight training. I mean, no questions asked. The schools that get to adopt this are going to be taking advantage of a brand new market of airplanes.
So one of the things you mentioned there was MOSAIC compliant. So that's not MOSAIC for the sport pilot people flying. It's more for the manufacturers, right? So what does it mean
Yeah, we changed, and there's a little quirk here, the fun one. LSA airplanes, we always thought sport pilots could fly. A sport pilot can fly an airplane with a 59 knot clean stalling speed, but we changed the LSA airplane and go up to 61. So there might be an LSA airplane a sport pilot can't fly. It's quirky. I don't know why we didn't keep it the same speed, but hey, that's what we got. So we've decoupled that, and LSA airplanes are now able to be built under that ASTM manufacturing standard, and they're not limited to 1,320 pounds, which is awesome.
So it's really just about stall speed again. It's 61 knots instead of 59 for the sports.
Yep,
so
for the LSA airplanes. Yep.
So if I put this multi-engine on there, multi-engine piston on there, it stalls at 50. I've never seen an aircraft that does it, but if it stalls at 61 knots, that is technically MOSAIC compliant. That's what you're mentioning at, I guess, Oshkosh talking about. They're launching this.
Yeah. As they build it under the ASTM standard. It has a stall speed that meets the LSA requirements. It could be a multi-engine airplane. We even threw, there's some stuff we haven't really seen yet. The simplified direction control airplanes. Think of, automated airplanes with a joystick. Like, they contemplated things in this regulation that are going to be for future EVTOL, things like that. We had to come up with a way to certify pilots for that. So they contemplated that stuff. And while it's not implemented just yet, the framework is now there for that stuff to happen. I mean, we may see flight schools at some point specialize in, octocopter personal flight airplanes, right? I mean, this stuff, it's coming, right? We're making these changes. For the immediate future, it's single and maybe multi-engine airplanes that are built under LSA standards that were changed via the MOSAIC regulatory changes.
So, but that would be a whole different aircraft type, and the type is not the right word. Category and class. If it's you talk about octocopters now. I'm like, that's
yes.
not an aircraft. That's not a.
So those fall under powered lift, right? I mean, it's not a helicopter. It's not an airplane. It's under powered lift, which was we not too long ago saw airman certification standards get launched on that, because can't certify people if we don't have the standards for it. So that's out there now too.
Yeah, wasn't there? I think this was at the Redbird maybe last year. There was a guy talking about powered lift, and I believe the main aircraft for that is the Osprey. Is that correct? And then so no one has certifications for this. So how are we going to get pilots to actually fly these new aircraft? And you have to it's the same process, right? I'm assuming you have to get your certificate, your pilot certificate for powered lift. So having a DPE that can do that, having the aircraft that can do that, of course, then having the CFI-S that can teach that, it's just not that resource is not there yet, right? So
they're actually working on that already too. I mean, they're starting with manufacturer-led training. They'll beta test, have their flight test engineers like that. They will actually probably end up training FAA staff, who will end up being the 2 or 3 or 5 people that get to kick it off. It becomes kind of a hierarchical game, right? Then we start getting the FAA folks to train some more pilots and instructors, and then we get some DPs qualified in it. And then we have a landscape that's out there for this eventually, like we do for the other things. It just takes some time to build it. I'll add one more. I've done a couple CFI renewals for a couple guys who had powered lift, and I had to ask, what the heck do you guys fly civilian world that was powered lift? And they said, oh, we own a Harrier. And I said, oh, okay. Because, everybody's got a couple of those laying around. So before this, those were like the only guys that went and bought it, an ex-military Harrier that were doing this in the civilian market. And, they were doing it for air shows and there's some Red Squadron contracting and stuff like that. But like it didn't exist. And now we're going to have this stuff showing up in completely, and it is a different category of aircraft, right? A
Yeah.
powered lift, So, but we're building the framework for it. And that's all part of that MOSAIC change too.
I don't know if this one falls into this category or not. I hate using words like category, class, and type just because, like, as a pilot,
Yeah.
there's nuances with each one. But as a human, as a general human, okay, there's a different type or category, whatever, of mosaic that we want to get, or subject of mosaic. I think I don't know if this applies. Fuel. So fuel, 100 low lead has been our go-to fuel source, and I think there's been some regulations in California where they're trying to phase this out. So now those are trying to take place across the country as far as removing lead. Is that is this a different topic, or is this kind of
No, it
in the
is. I think
same?
it's related because as we look at these MOSAIC aircraft, what can we power them by? And certainly the Rotax aircraft can operate on different fuels out there. We have, even this past week, Eagle, the FAA and industry kind of collaboration put out like the roadmap. Like we're shooting for 2030 to get unleaded fuel for everything, right? Not leaded and find 92 UL or 100 UL or whatever happens to be. There's a whole bunch of different fuel options we're working with, and the goal is to get that transition by 2030. Does that slip a couple years here or there? Maybe, but I think all of the MOSAIC focused, all the new LSA focused aircraft manufacturers are looking at this and planning for, look, we're not going to have leaded fuel forever. And as they look at their engine choices, if it's gas driven of some sort, we're seeing changes. Delta Hawks out there, we looked at some of their
Mhm.
stuff. They're looking at little diesel engines and stuff, right? Super cool stuff that we're going to see some of these changes happen to either go with alternate fuels or find other fuel options like battery, right? So we're looking at changes in our market, and those airplanes I know are all looking at that for their engine technology to not be stuck to that 100 low lead on something that we all know is going to go away over time. Even like I said, my 1947 stints, and I literally just came back an hour ago from filling up the 150 gallons of fuel on a trailer because I still run rec fuel in it, 92 rec fuel, because that airplane was
Okay.
originally designed to run on 8087, not the 100 low lead from back in then. So, maybe the old technology kicks back in, right? Maybe we look back at unleaded fuels in a different way. People are going to get creative with this stuff and figure out what works best. And the airports are going to be a part of that matrix. They're going to have to figure out, if I have airplanes at my field that use different fuel, can I have tanks for that? What's my infrastructure for that? We're certainly having that discussion in the electric realm. Okay, so I say I'm going to bring 20 electric airplanes to the airport as a flight training provider. Do you got the charging capacity for that? I mean, this isn't just hook an extension cord up, drape it across the ramp, right? I mean, we got to have the right facilities for this, and this is part of that mix also. So all these are pieces that are coming together, and as we kind of revolutionize our industry one more time to figure out where the next batch of training comes from, we're changing the assets that we use with this certification to some degree, and there's going to have to be some infrastructure that goes with it.
Well, let's bring this from full circle. So we've talked about the pilots. We've talked about the aircraft itself. We talked about the infrastructure. You talk about airports, fuel to service this. Kind of what do you? I know no one has a crystal ball here. We're all just in this fishbowl of pilots and regulations here. What is your kind of like vision of like where this can go the next 5-10 years, and what can the industry look forward to with all these changes in Mosaic?
I mean, I think there's some out there that were like, this is going to bring in millions of new pilots. Look, that's not what this is. This is a modernization of the system to allow pilots to fly for pleasure, flying, with less medical documentation requirements. I think that is certainly the biggest piece of
Totally.
sport pilot flying. We
Yeah.
figured out as we went through all of the sport pilots, the industry looked at it and said, look, the accident rate isn't higher because somebody was flying as a sport pilot without a medical. We weren't having a bunch of sport pilots out there dying in the cockpit, flying and crashing into school buses full of lawyers' kids. That wasn't happening, right? So I think if anybody says, we're going to get hundreds and hundreds of new pilot entrants because of this, I don't think that's the case. I do think we're going to see pilots flying with less barriers. They're not going to have to go through special issuance medicals, things like that, and keep flying because it's more convenient for them in airplanes they might not have been able to keep flying before, but are probably the airplanes they've been flying for years and years and years. So, if Susie's out there and says, look, I had a special issuance medical for something, and, I've been flying a 172 and I'm 65 years old and I want to keep flying. I don't feel like going through the special issuance, and I can't find an LSA airplane near me. Well, I can just keep flying the 172 now. So I think that opens an opportunity for keeping people flying in the aircraft they've been operating for a while. I honestly think the biggest opportunity here is the aircraft sector. The allowance
Mhm.
for us to build new airplanes with less burdens in the certification process. We're going to see manufacturers bring things to the market with, more expedience and less barriers. I think one of the things we all have, and I'm dating myself here with the gray hair. I watched the GPS revolution happen in airplanes, right? So we revolutionized in general aviation, starting in a lot of the experimental airplanes and then into the regular GA airplanes with awesome panels in the airplanes. And to be honest, a lot of times we're flying airplanes that have way more instrument capacity than the airliners do, right? Because we get to implement this stuff and put it in, and we're not trying to do it in a whole fleet. We can say, look, I'm going to put my, avionics company X thing in my panel. As long as I put some money at it, it's going to work and it's certified and off we go. An airliner has to do that across hundreds and hundreds of airplanes, so they don't. We have actually revolutionized the information technology, the avionic systems in our airplanes faster than a lot of other sectors. This is going to allow the same type of thing to happen with the aircraft process. We may see some new manufacturers. We may see legacy manufacturers start putting in airplanes that meet the new LSA requirements to be competitive in those sectors, right? Maybe we see some legacy aircraft manufacturers revamp current airplanes or old models that they've had and made new models to compete in the market so they don't lose market share to new manufacturing options. I'm hopeful that this is going to help us push that 50 and 60-year-old batch of airplanes to the back, where, eventually they do have to die, right? And help us replace our dying airplane fleet, our shrinking airplane fleet, with some new models that help us revitalize the training fleet, especially. I'm pretty focused on training, but also some of that will certainly revitalize what people get to fly personally for airplanes also, and potentially at a lower cost and of entry point here with airplanes that are built under these new regulations, because they don't have to meet all of the previous ones that made it pretty burdensome.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the time for America to really, get this new thing going. I think we have been flying 60, 70-year-old aircraft. I own a Cherokee and it's 60, 70 years old.
Yeah.
I love it though. It flies well. The engine's great. I mean, it was overhauled 20 years ago, so it's a really pretty fresh engine. But yeah, I mean, just looking, if we want to stay competitive, I think we have to be able to, one, bring more people in. So I think it's part of the pilot side of things. And two, we need better aircraft kind of model, or how do you say, like, I don't say infrastructure, but actually, different aircrafts out there, because we're flying the same, I guess, flying machine as 1960 and 1970, and it's like it's just, there's so much new technology these days. Especially you look at other industries like the space industry, like we have SpaceX out there, and they're launching rockets every single day. I mean, the same time when we had the Cessna 172 being built, we were launching rockets, but it's the technology has changed. Why hasn't the GA industry changed as well? And it kind of brings up because there was an accident that happened in China, I want to say a couple months ago. A lady or a guy, I don't know the full details of it. I didn't look at the accident report yet. There was it was a private pilot-ish. They have different regulations, but they have a private pilot, and she crashed into a building. And I was like, oh, looks like a diamond or something like that. Then I started looking at the report, and it's not one of our manufacturers that I've never heard of. It's a Chinese manufacturer, so they're already doing this type of stuff in other countries. Not calling out China or Italy or anything that are having their own manufacturers. But I think us, here in the States, we need to be able to innovate and keep up. So that's one of the good parts of MOSAIC, I think, because we are America is the aviation capital of the world. We have the most airports, we have the cheapest training. We have, it's part of our culture. One of the reasons we don't have like say high speed rail is because we fly everywhere. Because we have the 121 commercial stuff. We go fly everywhere. If you want to go, if I'm in St. Louis, I want to go to California, then I don't take the rail. I fly. I fly with Delta or something like that. So I think it's definitely a time for America to really get this, and I'm really excited for our community and the industry to really see. But I think to your point, right, it's not going to happen like tomorrow. It's going to be in a few years, and these changes that we're just laying the framework down. It's really to the independent operators, those manufacturers, to really use this framework now to start building the next generation of aircraft, and also allowing more people to fly these planes. So we are coming to, we've been at for about 50 minutes. So I want to give you some time here. You have a lot of projects going on, right? So you're a DP. You're also, like I mentioned earlier, you're the author of the ASA Commercial Pilot Handbook, and I think Private Instrument as well. What are some things that you want to tell the world? So we have an audience of mostly flight school owners, operators, and also student pilots. Like, there's a lot of people that watch this show, especially when they see your name, they go watch it. So what are some of the things that you want your audience and our audience to see and know from Jason Blair?
So let me come back one sec. One thing you said, it's not going to happen tomorrow, MOSAIC, right?
Yeah.
But it is going to happen faster than we probably think. I mean, I think we're going to look back in 5 years and go, oh my God, a lot has happened, right? There are a lot of manufacturers who are working to get ahead of other manufacturers to be the first to the market, the third to the market, whatever it happens to be. Nobody wants to be the last to the party. So, while it's going to feel like it's going to take a while, I think, all of us as we get older, you look back and go 5 years ago and think that was like yesterday, right? I think we're going to get that point in this discussion. In 5 years, we're going to go, wow, I didn't even know all this stuff that happened was possible, right? We're going to probably, exceed our own expectations, which is cool. Just means we all got to keep running with it and keep going. And that's exactly what I do every day too, right? I'm going to have to, as an examiner, look at the new airplanes that come out. When they come out, I'm going to have to go get experience and time in them and build that experience. We all have some of that continued learning to do as this goes. And that's actually part of the reason I do the ASA books, right? I do 7 of their oral exam guides, and we try to provide those out there to help people. But some of that's also to keep me sharp on it too, right? It is a great job. It's probably not the best time to take a check ride with me right after I finish one of those editions, because all the stuff is fresh in my brain. But it's fun. It's fun that way. So yeah, I do a lot there. Do a lot of check rides. I still stay engaged certainly with FSANA as their editor, and they've got their conference coming up. Work a lot with examiners. Love working with the FAA folks. Everybody up there that I've run into. I mean, I haven't run into a bad person at the FAA. I think the biggest challenge for the FAA right now is one, boy, God, they got to have a lot of bureaucratic stuff like any governmental agency does. And there's times I think as an industry, we wish they could move faster. And I think they do too. And then they also have a hard time getting staff up there. The industry has been super aggressive at hiring. We had a lot of airline hiring. We're short some inspectors. So I think sometimes when folks call their local FSDOs and they're like, I can't get an answer out of that, it's because they're literally that busy. So, if anybody wants a career in the FAA, man, go look at that too. I think we got a lot of cool stuff going on in this industry. We're going to see changes in training. We're going to see changes in some of how our testing happens. There's a lot of adaptive stuff coming. AI learning is being built into this, seeing this from a number of the training products providers. Old guys like me got to figure out how to teach young people who learn certainly differently, right? Their attention spans are different. You said you're on a whole bunch of social media outlets. I'm an old guy yet. I still use Facebook. I should probably figure out how to use the rest. But, we all are working this together, and I think it's pretty cool. I love working on the projects. All of this stuff keeps me fresh in the industry, and by God, hope I can do it for another 15, 20 years too, and stay up on it and see where we go, because, human beings are exponential learners and growth. And I look at what we've done in the last 40, 50 years in aviation and can't even imagine where we're going next, right? It's super cool. And this is a piece of that, the MOSAIC changes.
So you brought up some testing stuff that we did not touch on that. And one of the topics
Yeah.
that are always hot. And so we've been talking to you as like the expert, not the expert as MOSAIC, but you're in the industry and you know a lot about it. But the preface of that was, you're a DP, you're designated pilot examiner, and a lot of the things that are in this industry are like DP availability and like getting a check ride scheduled in the right date. So I know that's not the main topic of MOSAIC, but it's definitely, as a pilot myself, I've had to have check rides pushed back just due to availability myself too.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what is your take on DPE availability, self-examining authority, all those type of changes that are happening in that regards to the industry as
No,
well?
it's a great question, and I'll kind of give you the short answer. I mean, this we could talk about this for days. Maybe we do another
Yeah.
session on this. The examiner availability it's hard, right? I mean, so I'll
Mhm.
tie it to the sport pilot for a second. Anybody who was out there wanting to do a sport pilot CFI or sport pilot check ride, they've got to find an examiner who has that eligibility. Unfortunately, the way the FAA authorization system for examiners works is we have to ask to have that added on. And we basically have to do a full application package again to the FAA, and they have to do a panel like we were applying to be a DPE brand new. A lot of the DPs I've talked to are just going, I'm not going to bother. I don't care. Right. So that limits the availability of sport pilot and sport pilot CFI examiners. You can go to the designee.faa.gov website, and there's a search there, and you can select sport pilot if you're looking for one and find all of the examiners that have it. There's a few of us around, so that is an availability. In a broader perspective, we look at the number of check rides we've been giving. Back in 2012, we were doing about 67,000 check rides a year with like 900 or so examiners. We dipped at one point to about 790 examiners. We're like 1,100 right now. But last year we did 156,000 check rides. So the industry ramped up its demand on examiners, right? Because,
Mhm.
I mean, let's be honest, 21, 22, 23, hiring was awesome. Everybody wanted to go through flight school and get that great job, right? So it ramped up. That's not necessarily 156,000 people that took check rides, but I think what we've also seen is the speed at which people do their training. It's not, I'm going to pick at this over 3 years. I mean, we got a lot of schools that are promoting, look, come in, you can do your private instrument, commercial, multi, CFI in 6 months, 9 months, and jam it through. So we got people taking multiple check rides a year, and that places a more demand on the examiner pool. The FAA is working really hard to make sure the examiners we bring in are examiners that drive throughput. If we go back about 10 years ago, more than 50% of our examiners were doing less than 50 check rides per year. Okay. A lot of them were doing less than 25 check rides a year. In other words, we got an examiner on staff that's doing 2 tests a month. Well, man, that doesn't really help us move the needle. So the last 2 years were the first times that we have had more than 50% of our examiners doing more than 100 check rides per year. So the FAA is bringing in examiners that can actually provide service. I mean, I'm doing about 280, 300 test activities per year. So that's test, retest, discontinuance. And my God, I live in Michigan where, I know my average in February is going to be 7 to 10 because we're only going to get 5 flyable days here. The disappointing news media
Beautiful
that we
weather.
got, it's beautiful. I mean, I remember it was like February 5th or 6th, our local media was like, and in January we had 26 hours of sun in Grand Rapids. And I was like, wow, why do we live here? Right. I mean, because the summer's beautiful, but you have places where we do have examiners doing 400 or 500 check rides a year because they can, and we'll call it the Sun Belt, Florida, Arizona, Texas, things like that. And that's where a lot of our high volume training goes through. So the
Yep.
question of examiner availability is not just are there enough examiners, not just it's throw the right number of examiners, but the right kind of examiners. And I'm going to throw this back at the instructors and the applicants too. When you schedule a check ride, be ready, right? Like have your IACR ready to go. Make sure you're ready. Your experience requirements are in there. We estimated with the FAA, about a year ago, they thought 35% of our check rides are being sent back because they're not able to proceed with the check ride, right? Either the airplane's broken, it's got bad maintenance. We look and you're like, that 50-mile cross country was only 32 miles long, things that they're missing in experience, and we're sending people home. And I'll be honest, this is where a lot of the examiners went to, look, I'm going to charge you for my time. I don't care if we do the test or not. You're wasting my time if you show up and, we can't do it. So, and that's frustrating for people. And most of us don't do that, but a few of them kind of did that. And we're trying to get through. Pass rates make a difference, right? If we drop 3 or 4 or 5% pass rate in a certificate, that's 5, 6, 7,000 more check rides a year that have to be done for retests. All of these things are a part of it. So I'm going to tell you the best way to get yourself on an examiner schedule is be prepared, have your experience requirements done, make sure your documentation is good, and have your CFI and you communicate well with the examiner. And what you're going to find if you're a flight school is the examiner is going to probably start preferentially scheduling you, you know? Look, I'm going to take the phone call from the one that I think is going to be really well qualified and not waste my time faster than I'm going to take the one that I look at and go, oh my God, not again. This airplane's probably going to be broken. I'm probably not going to be able to get through this. The applicant's going to be missing experience and waste my time. So, be a really good professional, provide documentation, really good operators, send that stuff to the examiner ahead of time. There's nothing wrong. I get a couple people that I do check rides for, like I'll get a packet in either a PDF or sometimes I get a Google Doc that's like, here's the links to all of our airplane maintenance. Great. I can tell I'm going to walk in, I'm going to have a current annual, I'm going to have a current pedostatic, here's the experience, the requirements, send me the endorsement copies. And if I got a question and it's 3 days out, I can be like, hey, I see you're missing the 2 hours and the 3 preceding months endorsement. Do you got that? Right? Oh, we missed that. Great. Here it is. Right? These are things we can solve ahead of time instead of showing up at the check ride in the middle of an FBO. The instructor's, in one case, off in France in a simulator at training, and we're trying to get a hold of him at 3 a.m. France time, right? To make the check ride go ahead. So the better prepared you are as a training provider or an applicant, the better chance you're going to have at getting a check ride scheduled sooner and having it actually complete. Now, none of us can do anything about the weather, which is how we're chatting today, right? We talked the other day and I was like, I'm pretty certain my Saturday is going to be free. So, my poor guy today, he's getting rescheduled. We're going to try and get him in on Tuesday. The good news is the weather says sunny for now, and we'll see if we can't get him done. And sometimes you got to stick with it. I mean, I've had a couple people that, my God, I don't think they could have bought a good weather day if they sacrificed a chicken and did an anti-rain dance. But sometimes you just grind it, and that's part of it. And what I tell folks is, don't force it. If you get a bad weather day, I mean, I had a guy actually yesterday, we had clouds rolling in early. And he said, man, I don't know if we should do this. It was a multi-ride. I said, if there wasn't the pressure to get the check ride done, would you go flying? And he said, well, no. I said, then you got your answer, right? And in 2 months, 3 months from now, is it going to matter if you did your check ride Tuesday or Thursday? Probably not. So, just work with it and grind with it. Stay consistent. Have some fortitude that you're going to get it done and don't give up. That's a big part of this too.
Actually, while you're on the topic of kind of giving advice to students and CFIs, let's kind of keep going on that because I think one of the things I did for my check ride is I always prepare like a binder. This has like, okay, 50 nautical mile cross country. Here's the date I did. I have all listed out. Here's when the pedostatic check was done. I took a picture of the maintenance log. So it's already in a binder for me. So that way when, the DPE is looking at it, is like, hey, when was this last done? I can reference my binder and say, okay, look at this record here. And you can reference in the actual source, from where it is.
Yeah.
And I have my logbook or the maintenance logbook is right here, but I have a kind of a skeleton right here where it's like, I know, okay, this is the date I did this cross country. That's how I kind of organize and make sure I'm qualified for the check ride. So what is some kind of advice you got for
like that? Yeah, that is like my dream, right? I mean, there's a couple that I will literally get that in a PDF ahead and I can walk in because I've got it all, we emailed it to me, sent it to me, whatever. And I can walk in and basically turn my computer around and say, Sinai Acra, right? The other side of that is if we walk in and the applicant's like, I've never seen maintenance logbooks before. And you're like, oh man, right? My instructor gave me these. It's the first time I've seen them, and we're just fumbling through and we'll take an hour or 2 hours sometimes just to qualify somebody for the check ride, etc. And while we're doing that, the applicant's getting more nervous and nervous, right? That's not helping them either. They're sitting there with the examiner going, I don't know if we're going to do this today. And they're thinking, oh my God, it was my check ride day. Right. And, be prepared, have the stuff ahead of time, do exactly like you did. I love the aviation, the dork that's like, hey, here's my binder. What do you want me to show you? Right. I mean, that is perfect. Yeah. Command your own check ride that way. Be ahead of it.
Yeah. I learned that from, I used to work in quality assurance in the manufacturing environment. So I had to do a lot of audits. So I kind of treat like a check ride.
One of my good friends, he used a logbook prep company when he went to Delta, right? So he was interviewing with Delta, took his logbook, paid him like $400 or $500. I don't remember what it was. They prepared his logbook, built this beautiful binder, and he slid it across the table, and they looked at it, saw where it was from, they turned it around and handed it back to him. And he got back, and his wife's like, man, what a waste. You spent all that money, and they didn't even look through it all. And he said, no, that was the whole point of spending the money. They didn't need to look through it, right? Like, that's the best part. If you could show it to me and be like, I got everything I need, we're moving on. right? Now we're just diving into the check ride. Make it easy for you to show what you need, what you have to meet the qualifications. And that makes you understand them too. And dear God, one of my pet peeves is the CFI candidate that can't show me their own qualifications for a CFI check ride. Because I got to be honest, if you can't show me your own qualifications, I don't have a whole lot of confidence you're ready to teach students and get their qualifications set. Be ahead of this stuff and be prepared. So the administrative part of this function is real, and we do have to stay ahead of it.
I guess one final question, because this is a really good topic. I can talk for this part for hours too.
Yeah.
As a DPE, you probably see a lot of nervous, candidates go through your, ringer. What's the number one advice you can give to CFIs and students to pass their check rides?
So the best advice I can give people is treat it like a conversation, right? I treat myself as a really annoying passenger on the check ride who just wants to ask questions. Imagine I'm your 5-year-old brother that's like, why? What's that? And I mean, just talk, right? We're not here to trick you. We're not here to trap you. We're here to see, are you good enough to go out and do whatever the certificate is to stay safe in the National Airspace System, not hurt yourself or anybody else, or get a phone call from ATC or the FAA, right? Breathe, take your time, think through it. Honestly, stand up, walk around a little bit. You don't have to be locked in the chair. This is not CIA waterboarding, right? Bring some snacks with you. It's funny how many CFI rides that I see by the time we get done through 4 or 5 hours of ground. And it's not like you're getting grilled for that long. It just takes time to go through that stuff. Like, eat a snack. Your blood sugar is probably getting low, right? I mean, bring some stuff with you. Treat it as a conversation with a colleague about aviation who's just asking a lot of questions. Be very scenario driven. Like, we're not looking when we ask you a systems question for you to design it and build the new LSA airplane under MOSAIC, right? We need to know, like, what can you do to keep this airplane safe and flying? What do you need to know about whether you can fly it and how the systems work as a pilot? So if you can try to treat it just as a conversation, it's going to make you feel a lot less nervous. And I'm going to be honest, every examiner I know goes into the check ride thinking, I want to pass you because I want you off my schedule and we can move on to the next people too and get some more people through, right? Like, we feel the pressure of people needing check rides. We walk into it thinking you are passing until you give me a reason to give you a disapproval. When you show me that there's a knowledge gap, there's something that needs to be filled in, hey, that's when we're going to do this approval. But we want you to pass too. Like, it's easier for all of us if everybody just passes.
So you heard it from the DP himself, Jason Blair. Thank you so much for being on our show. If you're looking to pass your check ride, just have a conversation. Be prepared. If you plan the stuff, have all your documents ready, have all your stuff ready. Don't come to a check ride unprepared. It's unprofessional. And, we're, as pilots, we got to be professional. So, all right, don't wrap this up here. So if you have any questions, I believe Jason Blair has a website as well, right? You have a website.
Super simple, jasonblair.net, all kinds of stuff there. Yeah.
jasonblair.net, a lot of good resources on just thoughts from the DPE. I think he had a really good article on MOSAIC as well on there. Good stuff on his website. So if you are listening to this and you would like to reach Jason, join his website. If you're listening to this, if you're a flight school and need some help, ruddermarketing.com. And if you're a guest and you want to be a guest on the show, then feel free to call us 314-804-1200. Make sure you follow us on the socials, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, whatever it is. Find us on the internet and join the community. So we have these webinars, we have these podcasts, we're at the shows. So next month we're going to NAFI all the way in Dallas. We're going to be hanging out with I think John and Martha King later in end of the year. Then we do the Flight School Association in February, March. We're also in Redbird. We're everywhere. So join the community. There's a lot of pilots want to make this community great, and encourage anyone try to be part of this community to contribute and to be part of it. And to do what you can to make this a better place for all of us. So without further ado, we're going to end here. Thank you, Jason, so much for hopping on the podcast. I'll see you around. I'm sure we'll see each other pretty soon.
Soon for sure.